This Bengal tiger was an intarsia project way back. It never got finished, so I thought I would redo it, this time using the CO2 laser. These pictures show the first time that I tackled the Bengal tiger using a scroll saw. First thing we'll do here using logic trace is we're going to select the 4 points, which is going to define the 4 corners of the diagram. You can see here that I'm selecting the 4 corners of the diagram, and that will define my workspace. The next selection I'm going to make will be the line command, and that's where we'll draw the line across the bottom. And then I'm going to select the trace command, and that's going to do the perimeter all the way around the tiger. Just to mention that red pencil in the right hand corner, I use that pencil to mark off my starting spots. And it also keeps track of what's been traced. The perimeter of the tiger was easy to trace out because it's just one big long trace. Most of the tracing on this diagram I'll be using the trace command because a lot of the parts are irregular. They aren't a circle, they're not an arc, so the trace command will be the most prevalent command that I use. I'll also be using the open shape command. That's where you trace something out, and when you finalize it you don't want it joined up. Open shape is used a lot when you're tracing something inside where you've traced before. So for instance, like on the eye, there's little tracings on the inside and they're not complete, so that's why they're called open. It took me about an hour and a half to fully trace out this whole diagram. It's got a lot of parts and it's quite detailed. The idea I have for this project is to cut out this image using 4 different kinds of woods. That'll give me some contrast, and then take the different parts, the different types of woods, and combine them to make this Bengal tiger really stand out with a white backboard. All the wood parts that I cut will be 1/4 inch thick. I'm also going to be giving this project a clear coat of lacquer, and that's why I'm trying to use different woods, a light wood, a dark wood, give it some contrast, make it really stand out. Logic Trace has some neat settings. Under the settings, you can define the line width. Like I like a nice fine black line when I'm tracing, and it shows up on the display quite nicely. But you can pick any color you want, and the width. Also, another neat feature is when you save your work, the program saves an extra copy, which I call a work copy. And that copy can be reloaded and you can continue tracing. Say for instance you want to take a break or possibly start tracing the same image the next day. You just load that work copy and carry on tracing. The Logic Trace software can be loaded into a PC or a Mac. I think that's pretty cool. Another unique feature is that you can move the display contents to another device. That's the left-hand side of the panel. You could move that to a cell phone or an iPad. You could locate that right close to where you're tracing, and you can manipulate the buttons right there beside you. find the program easy to use and I find it fast. Took me about an hour and a half to do this full diagram. It's a detailed diagram, but I printed it large, which helps with some of the small parts. Easy to trace a small part. You have to keep it in mind here that when you're tracing this particular diagram, each part has to be a standalone part so it can be cut out. When I first wanted to create this Bengal tiger, like an intarsia project, back in those days I used that carbon paper, printed the image, and I traced out each part by hand using the carbon paper on the wood, took that piece of wood and cut it out with the scroll saw. It was a lot of work. The small parts were a real stinker. So because of that, it really never got completed. As you can see at the front of my video there, the picture of the Bengal tiger, the right ear is missing and some of his shoulders. I forgot to mention the size of the diagram here. When I printed this out, the diagram is 30 inches by 24 inches wide, so it's a good sized diagram, and that's why it's easy to trace out. Initially I was going to use black walnut, and then I decided to go to the red cedar. I wanted that kind of an orangey red look to it instead of like a black. Talk about accuracy. When I cut these parts out, I was able to put that part back on the diagram, and it was perfect. In fact, I used the diagram to identify some of the very small parts, like the whiskers. And of course the eyes. The internal part of the eye is very, very small. All in all, it's a good demonstration of the drawing board and the Logic Trace software. I'm all finished up with the tracing, so now I'm going to save that final file as my final DXF file. The file is going to require some node editing. Some of those lines will have to be cut out. I've loaded that final DXF file into Vectric Aspire 11.5. I'm going to check the vector quality, do some node editing, remove some of those excess lines. I'm also going to run that through the Aspire simulator just to see how the file is going to look. I'm also going to run that file through the laser simulator just to see how much time it's going to take for one cut. Looks like it's going to be around 52 minutes. This is the white backing board for the project. All I'm going to do here is just scribe the image on that backing board very lightly. That will act as a guide and help place some of the parts. This is my first actual cut, and I'm using a light colored mahogany because I want this to be a light colored wood. I'm using 4 different kinds of material. I'm using a white hardboard, a light mahogany, a cedar, and a red oak. Because I'm using such a variety of woods, I'll be doing a lot of cuts and taking those parts out just like a puzzle. One thing I've learned about cutting out this type of project, like an intarsia project, is you got to really pay attention how you remove those parts from the laser bed, because if you mix them all up, it does become a puzzle. So I try and push them on a file folder, something with a bit of stiffness to it but thin like paper. It works not too bad. This shows the full cut. This is the second full cut where I'm using red cedar, and this will be the same type of cut as the mahogany, the full image. What I mean about full image cuts is that some of the cuts are just parts. This cut is a red oak and it's just parts. Again, another cut from the light mahogany, and this just parts also. Once the parts were all cut, it can get quite confusing when you start picking all these parts off, so I ended up having to get the diagram back and a photograph to enable me to follow something for all the parts. Here, first 2 coats of lacquer are applied. So now I've propped up my image to have a look at it. It looks good, but I feel now there should be a frame. So I built a cedar frame around the whole image. The Bengal tiger project is complete. Looks a lot better than the first one I tried.